Hello everybody, my name is Matthias Zimmermann. I am one of the Eclipse Scout project leads, and in this session I would like to talk about a modernization project we have been doing for a large Swiss bank in the past, which moved a legacy application on the front-end side to Eclipse Scout. That application was called Webkat, or well, it's still called Webkat. The domain is credit, loan, and mortgage application. And the customer was a large Swiss banking group. There are roughly 8,000 users distributed over 330 branches, and the application age was more than 10 years. The status, of course, yes, it did contain legacy technology, and not just a few parts, but actually some major parts as well. However, this application is vital for the business. So mortgages and loans and stuff like that is one of the revenue generators of that bank. So the application itself is very valuable and important. And specifically, this application is expected to read for many more years. So just buy something off the shelf is not something that they can do, because the way they process and deal with loans, mortgages, and credits is one of their differentiators against the other banks. So you cannot buy something from the shelf. Rewriting the stuff they didn't want because it was too risky or too costly. So basically, the modernization was the approach to go. That is how a form of this application did look like. Probably if you deal with enterprise applications, that's no surprise to you. That's just a bunch of forms, and on each forms you have hundreds or thousands of fields. And that's the way applications grow if they grow over so many years. What were the pain points? Basically, the first pain point was that maintenance costs for this application was considered too high. So the branches paying for the application were not really happy to pay so much money for the maintenance and getting so few functionality in return. And the second part was that the user interface was considered legacy technology. And so what does it mean? Basically, if they wanted or if they had to add additional data fields and logic, this was just a pain. So they had to wait for days just for a single UI field, which is not really a good way to deal with business demands. And they also had a dependency to the in-house RTK framework, which was based on JSP. And exactly this framework was also responsible for this delay. It did things, well, too complicated. And it was not even JSP, but it's something on top of JSP. And because of the maintenance cost, they would really love to delete this framework, because the developer that did it initially was no longer there, and the people who really understood the framework were no longer there. So they're moving, they're trying to find how they can deal with it, and still it takes a lot of time and resources to keep it up to date, because at times they had to do minor modification on this framework. Also, maintenance, I have already said, that was too expensive, and basically they also had the desire to move away from the JSP technology. So what now? We have heard it before. The goal was to modernize the existing application. And the project we did set up had two goals, basically get rid of the RTK UI framework and reduce the maintenance costs. The scope and the requirements for this project was, we had quite a limited scope and focus, so we should focus on the front end itself. On the back end side, there are tons of things that we also should modernize, but to keep the risk in a small boundary, we decided just to focus on the front end and keep the back end as it is for now. It was also not allowed to do anything that would require any retraining of users. Retraining 8,000 users for a modernization just kills the benefit of the project itself. So that was also not allowed. Basically, this means that we had to keep the dialog layout with all the fields and the labels one-to-one, and we also had to provide at the end a one-to-one functionality. So it was really like building large parts from scratch was very much out of scope for this project. When you Google JSP in Google Trends, you get a curve like that, which is kind of an indication and justification why they wanted to get rid of the JSP technology. The question is just, where do you go? So choosing where you go, choosing a new framework, this is not an easy task, because if you go away from JSP, then you have many options. And these are just the options that you find on Wiki if you search for Java web frameworks. If you go for web frameworks itself, then you have many, many more options than that. So this is not really a simple thing to do. The official successor of JSP is JSF, so maybe we should look at JSF. There are different opinions about JSF. I don't want to consider myself a person to have a reasonable opinion about JSF, but I found a video of James Gosling talking about JSF, and I would like to have you listen to this one.
I think part of JSF versus the others is, for me, it's because they're all awful. I mean, I hate JSF with a passion.
Well, sometimes they say you should not put stuff out of context. What he was saying afterwards was the reason why he didn't like JSF was basically he thought that JSF is a marketing gag. Because Microsoft came out with something where you had XML and code, and then the Sun employees were pressed to build something with XML code, and somehow they came up with JSF, and he didn't really like that process. Anyway, so if it's not JSF, we have to look at other candidates such as GWT, Vaadin, and if you again use Google to see how the trend is over the years, then you see a similar pattern all over the place. So basically, you have rising interest, it peaks somewhere, and then it goes down again. So whatever you bind to, you have to live with the fact that this will get legacy over the time. And building something new, modernized now, maybe you would not want to do something like that that is already on the declining side. Maybe we should look at something that is really going up. And then maybe we have to reconsider the fact that we have a Java web framework, and we could actually look at JavaScript, HTML5. The green line here is the AngularJS line. But this would have been a really, really big transition for these guys at that company. They sometimes even struggled with Java, and moving them just after that to JavaScript was just considered too risky. And even if you would do this transition to JavaScript, HTML5, then there are also risks attached to that. I found another part where Biem was talking about HTML5, and I also would like to play this video. However, this video is in German, so I think it's 2.5 minutes or something. Who does not understand German? So I'll try to do a summary afterwards. But for those who do, which is the majority, I'm glad. I think it's quite good to listen because he can do that much better than I.
Das ist auch so ein Ding. So, für die Slides wird er wahrscheinlich nie wieder auf eine Konferenz eingeladen. So. Was ich meinte ist, die meistgestellte Frage so bei mir, was machen wir? HTML5, so killen wir unsere Swing oder Java Fix-Up-Anwendung oder native Windows-Anwendung, und HTML5 ist die Zukunft. Was ich mir versuche zu erklären meinen Kunden ist Folgendes. Es gibt keine HTML5-Projekte gerade. Und das ist vielleicht strategisch eine Zukunft. Was aber HTML5 bedeutet, du arbeitest nicht mit HTML5, man arbeitet mit einer Fülle von JavaScript und CSS-Frameworks. Das bedeutet, wenn wir jetzt sagen, wir bauen HTML5, müssten wir jetzt entscheiden, welches Bildtool wir verwenden wollen. Ja, wir könnten Grunt, Gulp nehmen, Broccoli und 1000 andere. Gulp ist im Moment das Coolste. Grunt war cool vor 2 Jahren, jetzt nicht mehr, leider. So, das bedeutet, wir wissen jetzt schon, wenn wir Gulp nehmen, in 2 Jahren wird es was anderes geben. Garantiert. So, dann gibt es die nächste Entscheidung. Ja, CSS. Nehmen wir Less, Sass, Stylus, Compass oder was auch immer. So, Sass ist das bekannteste, Less ist in JavaScript, Sass ist in Ruby, je nachdem welche Maschine, aber man muss erstmal die Entscheidung treffen. Ist es wahrscheinlich, dass Sass die nächsten 5 Jahre überlebt? Eher nicht. So, Angular 1 bedeutet, jetzt überlebt schon nicht mehr. Also wenn wir jetzt mit Angular 1 starten, wissen wir automatisch, dass mit Angular 2 alles anders wird. So, jetzt könnten wir natürlich auf Ember switchen, aber das ist so anders wie Angular, dass wahrscheinlich mal das ganze Team überzeugen müsste. So, was das bedeutet, HTML5 ja oder nicht, interessiert keinen. Die Frage ist, mit welchem Framework starten wir und werden diese Frameworks die nächsten 2 Jahre überleben. Und das Witzige ist, ich glaube, wenn man jetzt bei Windows-nativen Anwendungen bliebe oder bei Swing, die Wahrscheinlichkeit ist höher, dass das länger überlebt als HTML5.
So I tried to translate and only get the last point of it. So basically it's saying that he says that HTML5 does not exist because you cannot really choose HTML5 on its own. You need to choose among many options between JavaScript frameworks, CSS frameworks, and building tools. And the thing is, what is cool now will be dead in 2 years. And as long as it's not more standardized and not more clear what the HTML5 JavaScript space is going to do, then just keeping your, let's say, Swing application gives you a higher probability to survive in the next 2-3 years than choosing anything in the JavaScript world. And I agree a lot with this message, of course. But so whatever we evaluate in 3 years, we don't really know if this UI framework is still relevant, and we also don't know what newcomers will have. So basically the thing that will make the one that we choose legacy probably does not even exist in the minds of most of the developers. If you go to 10 years, then it comes completely unpredictable. And that is a long time. However, if we do core business applications, then 10 years is a normal time for an application to live. So this, we really have to take into account these time frames if you do business applications. The bank's decision was not to select a new UM framework, but instead replace the RTK framework with the Eclipse Scout platform. Why did they do that? Well, basically, they really like the fact that Scout is UI independent. So Scout applications, they do not depend on a particular UI technology. Of course, at the end, you have to do something with a particular technology. But Scout is built in a way that you have a very clean separation between the UI technology and the actual layout or the visibility and the whole functionality that the user is actually interacting with. And they also liked the open source benefits, especially that Scout is actively maintained elsewhere, so they don't have to pay for the maintenance anymore. In case something is not working as they expect, they also appreciate the professional services and that the minimal training that is required to get up to speed with Scout. So if they have new employees, then it's not a big deal to get them into the Scout framework. Basically, it's enough if you have a solid understanding of Java. At that point, I'd like to briefly talk about Eclipse Scout and maybe motivate somehow more why we could convince them to choose Eclipse Scout. Basically, the framework itself is built for business applications. So it's built for the specific purpose of users typing in data into forms and creating reports and selections and all that thing. Basically, the whole technical apparatus that you need to build normal business applications, most of that is already captured by Scout. What you do with Scout, you add the business functionality. It has also multi-device support, so if you build an application once, then the same code base can be used to show and interact with the application on mobile devices and tablet devices. So, for example, if you have a table with many columns, you cannot meaningfully display that on a mobile phone, and what Scout is doing at runtime, it's transforming the table into a list with separate entries, so you can scroll lists, tab on an entry, and then you'll see all the other attributes that would have been displayed if you would have selected that row in the table. But this does not require interaction of the Scout developer with the Scout framework. The Scout framework does this on its own. If you don't like such transformations, you would also have the possibility to configure that the transformation should look somehow different. As I said, Scout is UI technology independent. This is one of the main benefits of Scout, because some of the other benefits you get with other frameworks as well, so there's no distinction. Framework benefits is, that's what we like to call it. If you have Scout applications, they are kind of future-proof. You'll see why. This is important to us because the applications we build for our customers, or the product we build, that survives 10 and more years, 5 more years. So we really have to take care what we do in order not to constantly have to modernize applications, but capture the value over a longer time span. Then it boosts productivity. Also, every framework is claiming this. In our case, this is actually very important because we produce software in Switzerland. And if you have Swiss salaries, you better be efficient in what you do. Otherwise, your prices are never competitive. It's also simple to learn. We can use that very much because if we, most of our new employees, they come from university, so it's cool if they understand Java, but then we don't want to spend months training them, but we really like the fact that we can put them into a new project and within 2-3 weeks or 1-2 weeks, they get productive team members, so they can actually contribute. The code they do while they're at a place that goes into production, which also makes them happy. So let's come back to this claim that Scout applications are supposed to be future-proof. I'd like to start with some fundamentals about core business applications or business applications in general. These applications, they formally capture the process knowledge of an organization. And often, this is the only place where that process knowledge is formally captured. All the other knowledge is captured in individual heads or on papers that are somehow mismatching with the applications and degenerate over time. So the only place where you have the real process is in your business applications. And this is the value of that business application, that it has this capability of dealing with processes and capturing that knowledge. And usually it also takes years to build that knowledge. So you start with something, and acquiring more customers for your products gives you a better understanding what you need to offer, and all this knowledge is somehow distilled into that business application. Whereas the UI technologies, they're just a means to an end. So, and unfortunately, these UI technologies, they get old soon. When I say soon on the desktop, soon is in respect to the lifespan of these applications. And if you need to replace or modernize, then this is always expensive. And it boils down to that business is rarely willing to pay for a modernization or for some investment that is not perceived as a value for the organization. So if you tell them that you need to modernize just because you have a legacy, they don't like you. They say, well, it did work in the last year, just continue like that. And only when it gets really, really hard to acquire new people to understand and to tweak, or if the maintenance is getting really, really expensive, they start to listen, because you can kind of promise that it will be cheaper afterwards. So that is the only way that you can go into that area. So the goal is actually not really getting into this part in the first place. And how can Scout help you? This is a demo application for Scout for illustration purposes. This is a RCP application, RCP client for this demo application. And this was Luna Mars user interface. If you go to the code of that, we can see that this is RCP. And if you go to the code for this form, we see there's no RCP here. It's just plain Java, abstract Java classes. And for example, I have a general box, and then there's a picture box, a first name field. So if I go back, this is my picture field, this is my first name field, last name field, and so on. So basically, the abstraction level of Scout applications is on this part. And if we now move to the Neon release of Scout, we move to a complete web stack. Scout becomes a Java-only framework with HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript frontend, and the modernized application, if you want, looks then like this. If you look at the code base of this application, it looks like this. And the interesting point is there is no JavaScript here. There is no CSS3 here. It's the exact same abstraction level than before. So basically, if you compare the code base between Luna and Mars, then for this portion that we were looking at, it's exactly the same. And if you put business logic into these forms, then it's Java. So you can expect to survive that part as well. There are certain parts which change from major release to major release because we don't want to lose the connection to what is supposed to be modern. But the important point is that this is the part where the organization is pouring money into to get out some business functionality. And Scout helps you to protect that investment over a long time. This was actually also one of the reasons why we did not yet, we were too shy yet to move to JavaScript. We have a high expectation that Java will happily survive the next 10 years. We are not so much sure about JavaScript yet. It's really coming. Even on the server side, it's coming. But we didn't dare to do such a move yet. And we did such moves in the past, long before Scout became open source. This is the first Scout application based on SQL Windows. So you have here a table, you have a tree to navigate, and if you compare to the sample application before, you see that the pattern is exactly repeated. A couple of years later, we had these RCP clients, and again, this kind of navigation stuff and lines before, and we did move to Java, XML, Eclipse stuff. And we became open source. We had not only desktop, but then web clients, and now we're going to a complete Java framework with a complete HTML5 front end. And the trick is that we never had to throw away our product. We never had to rebuild the product. We could always keep what we had and change the small parts and let the product grow and profit from the fact that we never had to rewrite from scratch. And that is what you can do with Scout. So basically, this is the rationale behind that we are saying this is future-proof. So let's go back to this modernization project, because actually this is the topic of the talk. So for this modernization, once they decided to go to Scout, you have different options to do that. One is the classical, traditional way, work. I mean, you have these old applications. Developers are smart enough to read JSP, JavaScript stuff, and then transform that to the new technology stack based on Scout and Java. But you could also think about automatic transformation. The JavaScript, and well, JavaScript not so, but the JSP, these tagged JSP libraries, they're highly structured. So you could come up with a parser and a transformer that automatically transforms the stuff of your old application and pour that into the target stack of the new technology. Or you could have a mixed approach where you would only automatically transform simple elements and do the more complex stuff by hand or manually. I'll go into some more details about this one. So if you go for the manual approach, then the good thing is that you don't have to investigate a lot. You just take your developers, they do the job. And if there are many forms, you take more developers, they do more of the job. And they can handle complex cases too. So they can go to the business guy and ask, what is this supposed to be? Is there a special case I need to understand before I do this? And another advantage is that it scales pretty well if you say scaling along people. So if you put more people or more developers into the project, you can be faster. If you have less, it will take longer. There are some issues, however. Often, a lot of the work you have to do is kind of simple and repetitive. And then you can ask yourself if you want to pay the salaries for this simple task for costly developers. Another thing is that if you have too many of them, it does not only take time, the modernization, but you might have small quality issues. So your modernized application starts with some quality troubles in a way that if you have too many of the developers, they all do the same task slightly different. So your code base at the end is slightly inhomogeneous, which makes maintenance not so easy afterwards. And because the task is sometimes boring, you have in all possible and impossible places, you have so small minor bugs you have to deal with. If you look at this from a project planning point of view, this would be the required level of your modernized application. And this is the time, and this is kind of the moving forward. As soon as your application reaches the required quality level, you can say, stop, I move into production, and that's it. So it's very predictable. This is good for planning. If you go for the fully automatic approach, then you can expect to have initially rapid progress, because the core concepts and the core layout and all that stuff, this is kind of easy to capture with something like JSP, so it's also easy to write transformers to the target part. And you also get a high quality output. You get a consistent code base because it's all the same transformer, and if you did the transformer well, you virtually don't get any bugs in that part of the code base, which is very, very cool for maintenance afterwards. However, there are some issues because writing good transformers is hard. Sometimes it's too hard. Sometimes there's stuff that you cannot really meaningfully automatic transcribe. You need access to guys that have business knowledge and stuff like that. So maybe that's not always good. And this is the visualization of this. So even though you have good progress initially, if you want to cover more of the code base, you need to cover more of the corner cases and the specialities and whatever, and this will slow writing and parsing the transformer and the parser parts down. So you'll get slower and slower, and it potentially takes much longer than just doing it the traditional way. And in the mixed approach, you just combine the advantages of the two things. So you say, let's start with the easy part of the automatics and then switch to manual mode and do the traditional way. And this gives some benefit. You can expect that you hit this required quality level earlier compared to the fully manual migration. And this is not only time, but this is also cost that you save for the modernization. So this is basically the reason why we decided for this mixed approach. If you go step by step, then of course we had to first define the target application stack to decide how to organize the code, what should go where. And then there was some automatic transformation. What we could do easily was dialog layout that controls the text, and what we could not do is the JavaScript logic of the JSP part, so we just put that as comment lines into the target code. We could that easily because there was a time, I don't know if you've noticed before, that where Scout was actually a configured way. Scout applications were configured in XML. So we had for our own migration, we had an old software lying around that was capable of transforming our old XML stuff into the program model of Scout that it is not today. So basically, the guy who wrote that, he was just adapting this machine to the JSP XML stuff. And so this was kind of efficient. And then the manual completion in that step was basically finishing the logic of the UI model and mapping the client with the backend services, because we were not allowed to touch the backend services. We had to use the exact same as they were. And then, as in every project, there were 1 or 2 cycles of regression testing and bug fixing before we went into production. To give you some specific examples, this is a JSP combo box, if you want, which has a label. The label is in red, and the code that is shown in the combo box is in green. And for this, it was easy to completely automate the step. So it generates a Scout class, which is some blah blah field, and then we can put here the label, and we can put here the code. So there was no manual work required to move something like that. If you have something very similar, again, a combo box with a label and some content, it was not always possible to do that automatically. The thing is that here it's not a fixed list of elements anymore, but it's kind of a function calls a function and something. And then we said, if you would try to build a transformer in a way that it can handle that correctly, and we are sure that it handles it correctly, this is too costly. Instead, we just take this line above, put it as a comment, and put some to-do in front of it, so that you will not forget to touch that in that step when we go over that form. If you look at the numbers of that project, then there was an initial phase, was basically what I explained before. We had to adapt our existing transformer so it can handle the JavaScript part of it. And that took roughly 2 months until we had thought that we had found a good point to stop this automatic approach. And if you would have gone further, then getting a little additional value out of the transformer would have cost a lot more. So we had to basically judge from the hips where to stop this development of the transformer. Then the automatic transformation itself, for the complete application, took 1 hour. Of course, that's supposed to be short because it's automatic now. And then the manual completion, this logic and wiring with the backend and testing, that took 4 months or 13 man months, which gives a total of 15 man months for the complete modernization project. And if you compare that with the manual approach, we didn't do that in parallel, so we have to compare against estimates that we initially did. We thought that we would have saved roughly 4 man months, or 20% of the modernization budget. So basically, this was the input, and this was the output. It doesn't look really modern, no? It's an RCP form, and before it was this JSP form. But as I've shown before, once it's on Scout, it doesn't matter. So if they move to the web, there's hardly any change they need to do. They need to exchange the render, the RCP render, and they need to change to the Neon release, or they can even choose the Mars release and go with Eclipse wrap, and they would have the possibility to go to the web as well. So now their business functionality is really captured in the Java code against an abstract Java model. So they have this clean separation. The learnings of this project was this mixed modernization approach worked very well for this project. And also we have to admit that the JSP technology was very well suited for this approach because we had already this XML transforming engine lying around. What was very important is that our guys were actually working at the customer. Our guys are cool developers, but they did not have the necessary background in finance and the business. And without that, it would often have been very difficult to figure out how to transform stuff or how to do it properly. Especially if you're testing corner cases, then it would have been very, very inefficient if the communication between the client and our developers would have been complicated or have taken too much time. The benefits they have, as I said before, now they're on a clean architecture thanks to this Scout model that enforces you to have a clean architecture and separation of the business and the UI code. And they can remove the JSP technology completely from the application, and they can also now start to remove the RTK framework in itself. So after we finished this project, their own developers are now starting. They took over the further development and maintenance of this Webkat application, but they also started to move smaller applications that might not be so vital, but they move to the same technology stack. So they can have one developer, and if they need to do something here or there, they don't have to deal with many different technologies anymore, but it boils down to, if you know Java, then you can touch whatever you need. So they get more flexibility in assigning people to projects there as well. A summary, some general observations for modernization. Business applications live for a long time. UI technologies, they become legacy quickly. They are not considered valuable, but at the same time, they can trigger costly modernization projects. Recommendations. What we will definitely do again, try to restrict the scope of the project to a minimal subset that is meaningful to the purpose that you are following. And then, of course, go to production as quickly as possible. What was also a good point is that we had to deal only with one legacy technology at one step, and we didn't have to do 2 or 3 things. So first we thought it would have been more beneficial to also consider the backend at the end of the project. We were really happy that we have had the scope reduced to the front end and not also consider the backend. And you should definitely consider an automatic manual mixed approach, because there are many, many advantages of having initially created a large part of the code base, even so if it's the stupid part, but it helps a lot for having a consistent code base at the end. And specifically, be independent of UI technology, and if you want, check out Scout for your modernization project. Thanks, and please don't forget to rate the talk if you liked it. Are there any questions? Yes?
How did you do testing? Whether you get, how did you recognize that you have the result exactly the same as you?
Unfortunately, we did that the old-fashioned way. So the organization was so used to having their testing organization and do regression testing whenever they touch something. So they did it just exactly the same way. We tried to add, well, we had auto tests that the small ones added. They didn't have that before. But so the real test, if they have exactly the same functionality, they had their business case, they were typing here, and they were written down what to expect. And if they said, okay, it's that, then it's a green. So this is not really sophisticated. Any other questions? Even if you don't have questions, so if you'd have time, we have still a booth number 8. If you would like to share your experience with modernization projects, I would be very much interested in your opinions, what you have learned yourself, and to compare with what I've presented here. Thank you.